Rachel Blank. She's founder and CEO of Alara Health. She started as a patient diagnosed with a common hormonal condition affecting women's health and fertility, but struggled to navigate a system that didn't have answers. With experience in telehealth and a father who was an OBGYN, she saw what was broken and decided to build something better. Today, she leads Alara Health, a nationwide platform rethinking women's hormonal and chronic care. With 100,000 patients and over $50 million raised. Her message? Build what should exist and let the data speak for itself. A CNBC changemaker, Rachel Blank is in the Changemakers and Power Players spotlight. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. And we're thrilled to get to honor you as a change maker. But thank you for being here for this Changemakers and Power Players podcast. Let's start with your founding story, the origin story. This is a very personal issue for you that inspired you to start Alara Health. You were already working in the health tech industry at the time. Why, instead of just solving your own medical problems, did you decide to make it a business?
Yeah, I always like to say in a lot of ways, me founding Alara was just a very frustrated patient who decided that I wanted something better. And it kind of snowballed from there a little bit. So for context, I was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, in my early 20s. So this is about 15 years ago now. So at the time, it wasn't something a lot of people talked about. It felt very isolating. I kind of had no idea what it was. And I really found that, for many years, the concept of somebody to go to for this condition almost didn't seem to exist. And I think I actually was able to understand not just from a patient perspective, but from a provider perspective, because my dad is an OB. And I can see how in the traditional model, you're expected to play a lot of roles. You're oftentimes a primary care provider. You're back to back seeing 6 patients an hour. And it's just not enough time to help manage, more complex or chronic conditions. And so for a long time, I just kind of thought okay, I guess this is just how it is. The traditional medical system just doesn't work for conditions like mine, for more chronic care needs like PCOS or endometriosis. And then I ended up joining a telehealth startup back in 2018. Ro, yes, which was the most incredible experience. And I think in a lot of ways really changed what it meant to deliver healthcare and where we could deliver healthcare. Even back in 2018, it was kind of crazy, the concept of delivering healthcare online.
So sort of democratizing access.
Yes, exactly. And also just, I think, giving doctors a different format to practice in. It always, to me, was clear, the issue is not necessarily the doctors. It's when they're in these crazy practices, seeing 6 patients, 8 patients an hour, it's just not enough time. And so, really the vision with Alara was actually to build a different place for doctors to practice, a different kind of care model that they could practice in, where using telehealth, we're able to connect patients and providers with more time to do visits, more focus on these chronic hormonal care needs. And again, really just kind of empower providers to operate the way that makes the most sense for these patients with more complex care
And
needs.
there's so many pieces of that, and that I'm sure you also give providers opportunity also. And just to break it down, your office is here, you're based here in New York, but Alara has providers all around the country. How does it work? How do you find providers, and what types of problems are you focusing on for your patients?
Yeah, so we're available nationwide. We're actually covered by insurance nationwide as well. So I think that was actually, going back to the founding story, something for me was, well, if I'm somebody who has every access opportunity in the world, right? My dad is a doctor. I have great insurance. I have every care possibility available to me, and I can't find good care. I almost felt like I had a responsibility, if I found a solution, to help scale that to other women who didn't have the same advantages that I did. And so it's always been really important to me that Alara is extremely accessible to patients. So that's why we're available nationwide, why we're covered by insurance. Most of our patients are able to use insurance to cover their care services. And so that, I think, has been really exciting to see, just this access component. And in terms of what we treat a pretty wide variety of hormonal health needs. I always like to say, if you don't know where to go, you should be able to come to us and we can help you figure it out. So it includes chronic care management, struggling with weight, struggling with transitions in life. So maybe trying to conceive or managing postpartum. We really like to be a place where women can go when they feel like they don't know where else to go for care.
Any women's hormonal care issue, they could come to you. But you started focused on PCOS. How did you figure out how broad or narrow to make the product you were providing especially having come from Roe.
Mhm.
And when you were at Roe, you launched something focused on menopause care.
Mhm. So, this actually was a lesson I learned from them, which is you have to earn the right to do more than one thing in a lot of ways, right? So, if we had started with we're gonna serve every woman's health need under the sun, I actually don't think we would have done a very good job of it. And so the thesis always was to start with one thing, which in this case was PCOS. It was something I obviously knew really well, and really nail managing that condition for patients and be able to deliver a really great patient experience and then expand from there off of a really solid platform. That was always kind of the vision. I will say the expansion ended up being faster than I expected, just because almost from day one we had patients coming to us saying, I don't have PCOS, I have Hashimoto's, but I'm looking for this type of care. Can I come see you? Or, I have endometriosis. It's really hard for me to find care. Can I come see you? Or I don't fit really into a diagnosis bucket. Can I come get help? And so we ended up expanding actually pretty quickly into a wider variety of women's care needs, um, because of just the demand and the need we were seeing from patients. But again, the core of Alara really is to have a best in class clinical care model. And by starting with one condition, I think it really enabled us to have a really solid foundation to build that off of.
So going back to what you learned from Roe, and I
Yeah.
feel like we all bring things from various parts of our lives, but from that Roe experience was so specifically in healthcare, and then
Mhm.
launching menopause care, what did you learn about that world or even about leadership from your experience
Mhm.
there?
Oh, I learned so much about leadership. I will say the founder of Row, Zachariah Raytano, is probably one of the best founders I've ever come across. I learned so much from just watching him day to day, frankly. And there are even times where I'll think like, what would Z do? Or how would Z talk about this? That was just so invaluable.
What did you learn from him? What made him such a good leader?
Really, I think one of our core jobs as CEO and as a founder is to help people understand the mission and understand where you're going. I've always known from day one why this business is important and why it matters and why the mission matters. And in my head, I know where we're going, right? But I need to be able to communicate that to investors. I need to communicate that to potential employees, to my employees, like having everybody really understand where you're going long term, what the mission is, and get them really excited about where the company is going, I actually think is something that I observed being done really well and something I really try to emulate. And I think is one of the most important things that you can do as a founder.
It sounds like you have other mentors in the health tech space as well.
Yes, I've been very lucky in that the women's health space, especially, is just an incredibly supportive space. I think among the women's health founders, there's just this knowledge of this is such a massive unmet need. It is such a massive market. I mean, we're talking about half the patient, half the population of the US. And so I found it actually to be this really collaborative environment as opposed to a competitive one. I mean, even for example, the founder of MIDI, Joanna Strober, has been, really
Another
influential to me.
CNBC change maker.
Another change maker. She's fantastic. Could view this as competitive, and she has truly been so helpful to me over the years. And I think just across the board, I've had so many female founders in the women's health space who I've really turned to for guidance as I've launched the business.
Yeah, so valuable to have that community, but
Hmm.
the women's health space is still relatively new in terms of drawing
Yes.
investments. Such a high bar to raise money. It's such a relatively new space. There's still skepticism
Still.
about
Yeah.
the market size for women's health tech companies. What gave you the confidence that you could raise the money and scale this business?
So I will say, when I started the business, it was less about confidence and more about I strongly believe that this solution needed to exist. I knew it firsthand. And I kind of felt like, I almost had the background to be able to do it. I felt like between my experience with my dad, my personal experience, my experience at Row, like if I didn't start this business, I almost felt like it was never going to get started. So it was less confidence and more like this just really has to exist and I have to take a shot at trying to build it. Um, and I was very lucky to meet along the way a couple of venture capital investors, actually men, who believed in the idea and were very supportive of it and gave me capital pretty early on. I think a lot of founders will tell you this. I think if I had known like all the steps it would take and all the things coming down, I don't know that I would have felt that same level of confidence. It really was, okay, well, let's do this next phase and raise this next bit of capital. And okay, I've learned this. I'm going to iterate this for the next year. And really just kind of taking it like one day at a time, I think has really enabled me to do it.
One step in front of the other, one foot in front of the other.
Yes.
So you said you met some venture capital investors early on. How was the process of fundraising for you? Was it just an introduction, or how did you get those meetings?
Yeah. So the very first introduction I had, actually, when I was in business school,
And you went to HBS.
I went to HBS, yes, graduated 2018. And when I was in business school, I thought I wanted to be a venture capital investor. So I actually tried it for a couple of summers, met a bunch of VCs, realized that it was not my life path, or at the very least at the time, I was more passionate about operating a business. So I ended up joining a company instead of becoming a VC. But I was lucky to have met many people along the way. Again, this is where I do recognize that I have some privilege, right, in how I've been able to fundraise. And so I happened to have met an investor, told him, I've been thinking about this idea. What do you think? And he very quickly was like, I love it. Let's, let's give you some pre-seed funding. That has not been what my fundraising experience has been like since then, though, I will say. As you mentioned, being a female founder, raising for women's healthcare has been an uphill battle at pretty much every round. At the beginning, I would hear things like, isn't this niche? Even though women's health is not a niche market.
How do you respond to that?
I really think, I do think one of the things that has made me successful fundraising, I've raised over $50 million to date, has been being able to really use numbers. And this is a little counterintuitive, actually, to some of the fundraising advice you get early on.
So if someone says, isn't this niche? You don't say, this is half the population. You respond more calmly than that.
Yes, that. And also, I think sometimes people say, well, the early stage is just about the story. It's just about the vision. It's just about the story. And I think that works for some more stereotypically typical founders. I do not think it works for a female founder in the same way. I think you need to show up with numbers and with data in a way that is just a different bar. And I think that is actually where I was able to be successful over the years, is even from the very beginning stages, I had data to show investors. So I ran Facebook campaigns to a fake landing page with a different brand, saw how many people signed up for it, saw what the conversion rate was, saw what the implied CAC was. And I was able to go in with data around this. I paid people on Craigslist to do surveys with me and to do interviews to kind of, again, build the case of this is a real problem. There is a real need for this. And frankly, there's a willingness to pay for it as well. And so I think that's actually one piece of advice I have for any female founder, is you really have to know your numbers and lean on your numbers to tell your story in a way that you don't get to just kind of paint this vision sometimes.
And what would happen in those meetings? What would it take to convince someone who is maybe skeptical of the market size?
Again, I think that's where, really laying on numbers. So for example, did you know that half of women with PCOS will develop type 2 diabetes by the time they're 40? Half of women with PCOS are obese. This is the amount of dollars that it's costing the US population. Women, for example, spend $1 trillion a year on healthcare expenditure. Women 18 to 64 are spending $1 trillion a year. That is not a small niche market, right?
Yeah.
But you have to, I think, really lean into that. And I even had points where I would tell them, okay, why don't you go poll around your office and see how many women feel like their healthcare needs are met? And I actually had an investor come back to me and say, it was really interesting. Every single woman I talked to said that this was a problem. So part of it is also, I think, encouraging them to really hear personal stories as well.
And did you find that there was more reception, or a sort of warmer reception, from female investors? I mean, obviously a tiny percent of VC investors are women.
I think women were able to personally understand it a bit better. But realistically, a lot of the investors who I met with were men. And a lot of my cap table actually is men as well. So I don't want to diminish that. There were many men along the way who invested in the business, believed in the business. And again, I think saw it as, a really strong business opportunity, because the math is there, right? Women make 80% of all healthcare decisions. As we mentioned, they spend $1 trillion a year. They are more expensive to themselves and to their health insurers. And this is a massive underserved market that I will say more and more of the community is now aware of, that women's health is an important thing and it's not niche.
Other than just coming armed with the numbers and really having the research and the data, is there other advice you would give about how to navigate skepticism?
Yes. I do think a few things. One, especially fundraising, but I think in general in the business, you cannot take things personally. You have to have a thick skin. And just know that part of your job is to get no's. I saw something recently that was in fundraising. Your goal should actually be to get 100 no's as opposed to 100 yeses, right? Most people, it's not going to be a fit for many different reasons. It's not a fund fit. It's not a good stage for their fund. They don't get it. It's not within their thesis. But being able to kind of brush all of that off and brush off the skepticism and say, you know what, you're probably not the right fit, but I'm going to find the right fit is actually the biggest key, right? Because it's very hard to convert a skeptic to a believer, but you have to have the resilience to keep talking to everybody until you find the believers.
Yeah, that's a great way of reframing it. You mentioned how long this journey has been. You have raised $50 million. It sounds like that's been, a long process involving a lot of work from you.
Mhm.
How do you think you've changed as a leader through that process?
Oh my gosh. I feel like I've had to change constantly as a leader. Even just, building the business over the years, right? When we first started, it was me and one other person. A year later, it was 7 people. Now it's, nearly 50 people and 500 providers. And I've really had to evolve how I've shown up as a leader. I think, you know, earlier in the business, I was doing a lot myself, right? And that's very typical of a founder. You're doing all these things yourself. I really have had to learn how to delegate, how to hire, how to trust my team, and how to kind of step out of the weeds a little bit so that I can really be focused on the bigger picture, the strategy, the fundraising, the things that really only I can uniquely do, but I can go hire people who are really good at other things like operations.
And you have to deal with all these different constituencies, right?
Yes.
Because you have your patients, but you have the providers, which is a whole nother group.
Yes.
You have your employees,
And we have the payers.
and then you have the payers. And so it's the people who are paying for the healthcare, and then the patients. And so it's all these different pieces. How do you think about communicating and
Mhm.
messaging to make sure they're all clear of what your mission is, or
Mhm.
going in the right direction?
Yeah, I think this is where, I get really excited about what we do because in a lot of ways, it all works really well together. It all is like a flywheel, right? I don't have to make something up to convince somebody that it works. So, we have served over we've served nearly 100,000 patients to date. We have a ton of clinical data. We've published 2 impact reports around some of the clinical outcomes that we're seeing. So things like metabolic health improvements, weight reduction, reducing patients' diabetes risk, reducing their cholesterol levels, even just things like being able to be more productive and present at work. These are all data points that we've built up as we've served our patient population. And so that's then very powerful data that I can go show to the payer and say, look, we're actually saving you money at the end of the day because this is a patient population that's at high risk of these comorbidities and we're helping prevent them. And patients are happy because patients are healthier and they feel better and they're achieving things like they're getting pregnant naturally when they thought it was never possible to do that. And so, in a lot of ways, it actually is really an amazing thing about the business where everybody is kind of aligned, right? If I do right by my patients, then I do right by the payers, I do right by the providers. It all is about, at the end of the day, are we providing a really great patient experience? And if you can do that, the rest becomes positive as well.
Did you always see yourself as a CEO?
No. No, I can't say I really always saw myself as a CEO. I think in a lot of ways, I just really felt like this problem needed to be solved, and I really wanted to solve it. I was not the kind of person who was like, I really want to be a founder. Let me come up with any business idea I can come
Yeah.
up with just so that I can found something. I really felt like this was a problem that I had to solve in a
I
lot
heard
of
I
ways.
heard your mom said you were really stubborn, and you think that's part of your success.
Yeah, she probably would say that. I will say that is one thing. She says I'm incredibly stubborn. I have been from day one, and I also frankly am, how shall I put this? I'm a, like, high I like to achieve things, right? I like to, like, see a challenge and go for the challenge and achieve it. I like to constantly be setting different bars and different things for myself, that luckily goes pretty well with
Yeah,
being a
being a
CEO.
CEO. So what do you think your leadership superpower is, though? It's not just being ambitious.
Um, I think it's a couple I got a piece of feedback once that really stuck with me from an old boss. He said, "You're really good at being right, but not being righteous." And I actually think that is a really important thing to have as a CEO and as a founder is, again, you might know the right answer and you might know where the business needs to go, but it's all about how you communicate it to different stakeholders at the end of the day, right? It's how do you bring your employees along on the journey with you? How do you bring investors along on the journey with you? How do you bring these other stakeholders like payers along on the journey with you? And so both having the conviction of being right? Like I know where I'm going, but also having a low enough ego to be like, I'm going to communicate it in a way that really brings people along with me. Um, I think is actually something I really strive to do really well, and I think has served me well over the years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, are there things you know now, having worked at Roe, gone to Harvard Business School, launched this company,
Mhm.
scaled this company, that you wish you had known earlier in your career? Advice that you would give, sort of those things that you wish hadn't taken you so long to figure out.
Oh my gosh, so many things. Um, I will say a really good piece of advice, and this is Sheryl Sandberg's advice, is not mine, is if you get offered a seat on the rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just get on. I think that is incredible advice, and in hindsight, I wasn't necessarily sure I was doing it I don't know that I was aware I was doing this at the time, but in hindsight, it's some of these, bigger leaps, bigger bets I took of, well, I really love to work for this manager, or this company's really exciting, that actually really helped supercharge my career
So
in a
take
lot
the
of ways.
opportunity, don't ask questions.
Yeah, and also don't ask so much about your role. I think that's another thing. I think when I was younger, I was very focused on, you know, well, what's my role? Where am I going in my career? What's next for me? What's my next opportunity? And frankly, if you just focus on doing a really good job, you're going to get rewarded for it and you'll kind of figure out along the way. I think I could have been a little less focused on, what is the next 2 to 3 steps from here and more how do I just focus on the today and the really good job of today. I think that's advice I'd give.
Sort of zen leadership opportunities. Um, we always like to ask about life hacks. You have an
Mhm.
incredibly busy job. You're
Yeah.
managing this company. If I could say, you're expecting your first child.
Mhm.
How do you organize your life so you can seemingly do it all?
Yeah. Okay, so I will say another piece of advice, and this might be controversial. I actually think one of the most important business decisions that you make is who your partner is. Um,
Sheryl Sandberg also talks about that.
yeah, I think it is incredibly important, and I don't think I appreciated enough when I was younger how much your partner will enable you to either really thrive in your career or sometimes can hold you back. So I will say I have a very supportive partner who, he also is very ambitious. He's an architect. He doesn't mind if I'm, really prioritizing work and making that a priority. And I think we really are able to make it work together. So I actually think that's one big piece is you need a supportive partner. Um, and also I think we need to be honest about the things we're not doing. So I am not particularly clean. My bed is not made half the time. I have an amazing cleaning lady. I get meal delivery service, right? So part of my life hack is I outsource a lot of my non-work life and I just don't feel guilty about that. And then I think about things that are really, non-negotiables for me. So like movement and working out is a non-negotiable for me. I make a priority to do that
What do you like to
every
do?
day. I'm a big walker. I love walking, either like an incline walk or outside. And I've been very focused on getting strength training in 3 days a week. There's just so much data around how good it is for you from a longevity perspective. So really focused on strength training
That's
too.
awesome. But it seems like in order to be able to know which things you can outsource or you're just going to decide not to care about is really about figuring out what your priorities are
Yes, correct.
and the things you need to do yourself.
Correct. And also being aligned with your partner on like, in our life, these are things we're going to prioritize, and these are things we're not going to
Yeah.
prioritize.
Any other secret life hacks?
I mean, Claude has been my new best friend.
So
um,
tell us, how do you use AI?
yeah, I'm very bullish and excited about AI. I have been using Claude a lot in my day to day. So everything from helping me with my emails. I actually have a tool that goes through my email inbox every morning and auto drafts replies based
Wow.
off
How good are the auto drafts?
quite good because it's trained on, how I normally answer my emails. So that saves me a ton of time. Even things like our accountant wanted to charge us $30,000 for a Nexus study. I had Claude do the study in an hour. I have just been using it more and more in my personal life too, right? I'm like, I want to buy something, give me the 3 best options and compare them in a chart, and I'm going to pick the best one to buy. So I've been very into AI.
AI, the life hack that we've
Yeah.
all been benefiting from. But in terms of the company, do you feel like the company's been embracing it?
Yes, and it's been a big push from leadership, from myself to encourage the company to use it. So, for example, anytime I use this successfully, we have an AI Slack channel. You're encouraged to share, hey, I did this thing in AI. This is how it helped me, and kind of encourage the whole company to use it. We've been spending a lot of time investing in actually automations across the
Hmm.
company. So, how do we make the company more efficient? How do we, frankly, drive better patient experiences because things are more efficient? And because, for example, your provider is not spending as much time, typing notes in the visit because there's an AI scribe tool that's doing the scribing for them, right? And so they can be more present and more focused. I think there's a lot of fear about like, does AI replace humans? And I actually find in a lot of ways, at least in our business, the opportunity is for it to make humans more human, right? Especially with doctors. How do we get them to do less administrative work, to spend less time in the visit thinking about their notes and really be, that human interaction in the visit, I think is a really exciting opportunity.
And improving the quality of care, which is really what Alara was
Yes,
all about when we founded
exactly.
it. Rachel, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your life hacks. I'm going to think about what I can outsource in my life. Thank you for joining us here today.
Thank you so much. This is great.